Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, podcast listeners of all ages and stages, welcome, bienvenue, chez épisode 96. We're up to episode 96 of the Jolly Thoughts podcast. And you know what? The 76, the person who I'm actually speaking to on this podcast today, he would understand that number. A lot of people would understand that number. But even if I spoke real French to him, more French to him, he would get it, parce que he speaks français. My friend Axel Kazadi, newly minted Dr. Axel Kazadi, is on the podcast today. And guys, I have done some geeky episodes in the past where it's like, very little small talk, and all of a sudden, like, let's get into some technical terms. This may or may not take the cake. I mean, we hit the ground running with terms like transubstantiation and goodness gravy. I even had a glossary that I needed to look at some point in time. I don't have them in front of me. Manducation. I learned the word manducation today. You can learn the word manducation if you want. This conversation was about the Eucharist, communion, the bread and the cup that represents the body and the blood of Jesus Christ, and how that works in Christian worship. Dr. Kazadi's thesis was about kind of tracing some of the roots of that from early Catholicism, or actually from kind of middle Catholicism, through to some really, really prominent reformers, and then into the church today, and specifically with some kind of applications towards, well, the church that I serve in, the Wesleyan church. And so I just want to have a conversation with Axel because he's awesome, but also I'm very interested in this topic myself. And so I think that if you are remotely interested in this kind of stuff, you're going to be like, wow, you're going to get some stuff out of this because he shares some gold. If you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know if this conversation is going to be for me. You know what? It's okay. There's other conversations, other podcasts, and also other episodes of this podcast. But I'm going to tell you, if you can invest in it, you're going to walk away with some gold. Axel's a great guy and has a lot of wisdom to be able to share based upon what he's been researching and digging deep on for the last few years. So without any further ado, then, my conversation with my friend and yours, Dr. Axel Kazadi.
So I'm always fascinated if someone's gonna take a PhD, it's not like I have a passing interest. It's like I have something that I'm willing to spend years researching and dissecting and losing sleep over and getting beat up online over and whatever. And so, like, what was the interest in particular that you had that drew you into to this study?
Yeah. So my dissertation was on the Eucharist, but particularly looking at the way the church is talked about in the Eucharistic theologies of Martin Bucer, Peter Vermigli, and Thomas Cranmer. And the reason why I stumbled on this topic, well, first of all, at the beginning when I applied for my PhD program, I wanted to work on Calvin because my master's thesis was on Calvin, and I'm very much interested in Calvin's theology.
Sure.
And so I thought I was going to, work on a particular sort of like area in his theology. But then halfway, because the North American PhD model requires you to take a year and a half of like coursework, whereas the European model, it's like research at the very beginning. So for me, during the coursework stage, I took a course on Eastern Orthodox sacraments. Eastern Orthodox sacramentology. That's what it was called. And just being introduced to, through my reading of the text in that class, I was introduced to this sort of like sacramental way of looking at the world. Alexander Schmerman, for example, For the Life of the World, that book, we read that book, and I was really intrigued by just the way the world was depicted. It's like it's a world that's fashioned by God, and it's a sign that points to God, and it is almost that it's almost that they take for granted that theological insight.
Mhm.
I mean, it's in Paul's epistle to the Romans. In Romans 1, Paul says that God's invisible attributes are are in creation, and they point to God. But up to that point, I mean, and this is an eternal wrestle that I had. I was always like, even in grade school, I was influenced by the Enlightenment way of looking at the world. It's like the world is just a natural world. It's not pointing to something.
Mhm.
When I look at a tree, I'm really looking at the tree, and we have scientific knowledge of what makes up the tree, the properties of the tree, and we don't have to really look beyond to really learn what a tree is or what the universe is. And so the naturalistic way of looking at the world really brackets out the sacramental view of creation. And so Alexander Schmemann just sort of like he he revolutionized my way of looking at the world, and because that happened, then I started looking at my own Protestant tradition. It's like, okay, maybe let's put aside the creation for a sec. What about the things that we do in the church? The sacraments, right? Like, because at that point, I always heard a lot about the symbolic understanding of bread and wine are just symbols, right? And so for me, that was sort of like a naturalistic way of looking at the Eucharist. And I'm like, okay, there's a problem here. And so that interest really motivated me to dive deeper and to look at this, sacrament. And during my reading of texts on the Eucharist, I start to realize it's like, okay, even for the early church, there was a connection between the Eucharist and the church. The Eucharist, for example, Augustine, he talks about um, the caritative um, signification of the Eucharist, meaning that it symbolizes the love that believers um, share
Mhm.
in Christ. So it the Eucharist symbolized the body of Christ. I mean, it has ecclesial referent, which is the church, the church which is the body. And so at that time, I realized the symbolic view really s- brackets out it 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 um it pushes away that ecclesial referent of the Eucharist, first of all. But also what it also does, it doesn't take seriously the link between the sign and the reality. Um, so the Eucharistic elements really signify the body of Christ. And so how do we understand that?
Mhm.
It becomes a matter of debate, right? In the 16th century, you have the Eucharistic debates between Protestants and Catholics over the nature of Christ's presence in the Eucharist, but also among the Protestants. But I was really challenged to consider the ecclesial referent of the Eucharist, and to really affirm the link between the sign and reality, and then the issue of sacrifice came up during my reading. It's like, okay, in most evangelical churches, when the Eucharist is celebrated, we simply focus on the um, the uh, we typically focus on the ones private relationship with God. We challenge the congregation to examine themselves, and that's a serious point, and it should be there, and before partaking in the Eucharist. And then once they examine themselves, then they can go up and receive the Eucharist. But I always thought it privatized the Eucharistic experience, and there was no room for sacrificial language. So it is as though we come to the Eucharistic celebration, it's about me receiving, and then it ends there. And so once the theme of sacrifice came up, then I was really interested in looking at the ecclesial dimension of Eucharistic sacrifice and the Eucharistic theologies of Martin Butzer and Peter Vermigli and Thomas Cranmer. And then in my dissertation, I do address implications for. It's not a central focus of the dissertation, but I do address implications of that thought for the Wesleyan Church, for example.
I mean, it feels pretty central. I can be as a Wesleyan, I feel like it's central, but
right.
But
It's just that that section. It's an important section, but it's an area where I need to do further research and development.
Yeah, I mean, the work stands alone. So if you didn't have, what's interesting is, I haven't read 1,000 dissertations, but I've been through them, and I'm not used to seeing. And now or here's some like really practical implications that usually doesn't, I don't think anyway, usually make its way into a thesis. And so I was like, oh wow, that's kind of like, you have it's very evangelical. So you have an actual like, wow. And now then how shall we live? Right. Like, let's have some kind of practical implications. And so I hope we can talk about some of those as we go here. Cause I think, both you and I, we live and serve in Wesleyan churches. So in the first, 5 minutes of this conversation, you said the word Eucharist at least a half a dozen times, not more. Most people have figured it out by this point in time. But if you did grow up in a Wesleyan church or an evangelical church, whatever, you're not using the word Eucharist often, probably. No. So what do we usually call it? Communion?
We usually call it communion, the Lord's Supper. Yeah.
It's the bread, and you said wine. Again, Wesley's don't be using wine, but it's the bread in the cup, the bread in the juice, the bread in the pouches. And so, so fascinating. You got interested in it through Eastern Orthodoxy in some respect, opens your eyes to see like, oh wow, the sacramentality is real. And what's interesting about that is that then because of where you live and because of where you work, you actually have to, it seems like you have to deal with Roman Catholicism. Like you kind of you pick up the conversation, even though you have some earlier reference. Like it's Aquinas is kind of where we're Thomas, whatever, is kind of where we end up. It seems like we pick up the main, which is already after we've had that kind of giant split. And so it's interesting that this kind of other part of the Christian world is actually in some respects what said, like, they don't have the same kind of arguments or conversations that we do because, they've kind of been operating in their own kind of sphere as they've gone along there. So you spend a lot of time, like some terms that you get to in the beginning of it, you talk about things like, I think what a lot of people, like if they're anything like me, they've heard, like you said at the beginning, that things like baptism and things like communion, because those are really the only two that we talk about very much in our churches. The word JUST shows up all the time, right? Like it's just a symbol. it's just pointing to something, whatever. It's just an outward sign of an inward reality. It's just. And we don't mean fair. We mean only. Right? We end up. It's funny that word just ends up in our prayers a lot. Father God, we just want. We're really focused on that 4-letter word. That's a 4-letter word, people. So this kind of justness, like it's only a symbol, is really, really strong. And I think, again, because of where we're coming from, you mentioned the Enlightenment, So this kind of like everything is rational and scientific,
Right.
but also we emerge from a different church, right? So
Yeah.
our giant trunk of the tree splits, and we often, it seems like we have to identify ourselves as opposed to Catholicism, not
Right.
in line with Catholicism.
Right.
And so their giant conversations around the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th centuries,
Right.
it seems like they're focusing on how it's the body and blood of Christ.
Right.
And eventually we end up thinking it's not the body and blood of Christ. So how did that happen, in short?
Yeah.
That we end up with thinking it's just. How did we end up with it's just?
Yeah. Well, memorialism, there's a term, the memorial view, which simply argues that the Eucharistic elements are just symbols. So the first Eucharistic controversy during the medieval period was actually in it occurred in the 9th century between Paschasius and Retrominus. So Paschasius, he took the literal sort of like position on that the bread and wine they become once the priest consecrates the Eucharistic elements, they become the literal body of blood of Christ, the body that actually was crucified, that was in Mary's womb. So he overly emphasized the corporeal element, and then Petrumnus came along and said, no, he took the symbolic view and said, no, the Eucharistic elements are symbols of Christ's body and blood. After that controversy, the church honestly they sided with Paschasius, because at least Paschasius admitted that there's something here, that Christ's body and blood is in the Eucharistic elements. They were uncomfortable with Retrominus' view that only considered it as a symbol. And then after that, you have another Eucharistic controversy between Buringer. So some people pronounce that word Buringer, and Lanfranc. Lanfranc argued for the conversion understanding of the Eucharist, that when the priest consecrates the bread and wine, they convert into the body and blood of Christ. The language that Aquinas uses like substance or accidents were not yet used at this particular period, and so it became really confusing to understand exactly how Christ. We say that Christ is present in the Eucharist. Well, how exactly? Like, what's the nature of that? It's only until you get. So you have the Fourth Lateran Council in 1215 that affirms transubstantiation, and and says that it's the official teaching of the Church, and it condemns the sacrament, the symbolic view. So at this point, the symbolic view is considered heretical.
And of course, this is after the West and the East have split. So now we're only talking of the Roman Catholic Church and
that's right.
Our forebears.
Right.
Okay. Yeah.
But even at that point, when transubstantiation, the doctrine of transubstantiation was affirmed as the official doctrine of the Church, not everybody taught it or held or submitted to the decision of the council. You had three understandings of change. One was conversion, which is transubstantiation. Another one was annihilation, which argued that once the priest consecrates the bread and wine, they're annihilated, and then Christ's body takes their place.
Bro, that's how many angels dance on the head of a pin. I mean, at the end of the day, like that feels like that's pretty much the same thing.
Right? So they don't exist; they're not there.
Yeah.
And then another point was which now is coined as consubstantiation, that Christ's body and blood exist along the Eucharistic elements. And so you had people in the Catholic Church, even bishops, who sometimes affirmed the annihilation. And then Scotus, for example, this is later, he has a particular understanding of transubstantiation that is different from Thomas Aquinas. Thomas Aquinas affirms that the Eucharistic elements convert, the substance of the Eucharistic elements convert into the substance of Christ's body and blood. And he's trying to remain faithful to Lateran 4. Whereas Scotus and William of Ockham, they're like, sure, yes, Lateran 4 affirmed transubstantiation as the official doctrine, but we're unhappy with the conversion theory. This idea that the substance of the Eucharistic elements convert into the substance of Christ is hard, it's difficult to accept, because one, how can you rationally accept floating accidents? Because metaphysically, accidents inhere in substances, right? So you can't have accidents without a substance. So for example, a table, right? The reason why we classify a table is because it corresponds to this concept of tableness that we have in our minds, right? You can call that the substance or the form of the table. But it also has accidents, right? It can be wooden, sometimes it can be like metallic, right? So the wood itself, it's shaped to look like a table. You can't separate the accident, the color or the wood from the form itself. So you have the accidents of bread and wine after consecration just floating there, and they don't adhere in the substance. And so it's rationally difficult to accept that. And so it requires more miracles for that to happen.
Even more miracles.
That's what right, for that to happen. The simplistic view would be consubstantiation. You don't have it, it's simple. You don't have to do many metaphysical gymnastics to sort of like explain.
Yeah. And so I've heard consubstantiation as like things like it's like you said earlier, like so it is still bread. So
right.
the con is with, right? It's So now it is still bread,
right?
But Christ's presence, his body,
right?
We're going to stick with body at this point in time. His body, his blood are with the bread. So sometimes it means it's inside the bread, it's under the bread.
That's right.
But then,
graphically speaking, it's easier to digest that, to accept.
But literally speaking, about too.
But transubstantiation,
okay, it's still bread. Let's be honest. You bite into it, and you like this is very bready.
Right. It's the accidents that you're tasting. Right. Yeah, that's what they would say. But it's very difficult. That But so he and another issue that he had, and we don't really need to get into this. This is when it becomes a bit too complicated. This issue of dimensive quantity. So Thomas Aquinas says he's only concerned with the substance of Christ's body and blood existing. For Scotus, that's not helpful, because it's not a personal category. One should only talk about presence. If Christ exists or is in the Eucharistic elements, you have to deal with presence. You have to deal with his dimensive quantities. Um, uh, and Aquinas is uncomfortable with the accidents of Christ existing in the Eucharistic elements, because one could read that in the material direction.
How much Jesus do we have?
Right, that there's a material change here that's taking place. No, it's a substantial change in the sense that Christ's body substantially, exists in the Eucharistic element.
It's like I've heard it said, like if you could get all the pieces of the true cross together that are floating around the world, the true cross, and then put them together, it would make up like Noah's Ark. The idea of like there's too much. So the idea of like if this is really somehow actually Jesus's body and he had a physical body, the math is not mathing in terms of making this kind of like those quantities as you speak of.
Right. Yeah. So Scotus, he affirms the succession that once the sacraments are consecrated, the bread and wine stop being there. Christ's presence not begins to exist, but appears there. Right. So already after Lateran IV, there are people even within the Catholic tradition that had a problem with conversion.
Sure.
When you get to the Reformation, Zwingli is typically the one who is credited for coming up with this idea of the memorial, the symbolic view. Zwingli, at the beginning of his career, he did affirm that there is a real feeding, a real Eucharistic nourishment that takes place in the Eucharist. But at the middle point of his career, he debates Martin Luther. He often affirmed this crass connection between the Eucharistic elements and the body of Christ. And to Zwingli, it almost felt as though Luther was teaching a Catholic sort of like position. He's affirming the literal, the corporeal presence of Christ.
Kind of was, wasn't it? At the end of the day, if you look at Lutheran doctrine to this day, I mean, it's like that doesn't.
Right.
You mean the poster child of the Reformation? That guy is saying that it actually is real. Like,
right, he affirms the corporeal presence of Christ. That it's there. Yeah. So people tend to think that Luther held or believed in something like consubstantiation, but that's a wrong term. He believed in sacramental union, that the Eucharistic elements are united sacramentally with the body and blood of Christ, and we have to affirm by faith that Christ is there, united with the Eucharistic elements.
But the language that they use,
the language he uses,
real
presence, real presence, and he affirms the corporeal.
Not just.
Not just. And so to someone like Zwingli, is like, no, I'm uncomfortable with that. It's too Catholic. And so he went the opposite direction and affirmed the symbolic or the memorial view of the Eucharist. But then at the end of his career, he circled back to his original point that there's real feeding, even though you have this symbolic view.
And why did he circle back?
I think it's because he was uncomfortable with this idea that there's only just a sign.
Mm-hmm.
Right? There's this spiritual reality of believers feeding on Christ when we celebrate, but he doesn't locate it in the Eucharistic elements. It just happens alongside the Eucharistic element.
Like the one thought that I had when I was reading through like this portion of people, during the Reformation was like, I mean, if only you never know, like when you start down a road, unless you have like a map. okay, we're just walking or whatever. You don't necessarily know where you're going, right? Like,
Yeah.
this looks good. I don't want to go that way, so I'm going to go this way.
Yeah.
Or like, I know there's a bump on that road, so I'm going to go this way. And so there's a reason why these reformers, went the direction that they did. But I wonder if they could look ahead 400 or 500 years and see churches that are like, it's just a symbol, and to see what has happened. I mean, this is not an academic perspective. This is more like anecdotal. I'm just like, it's really hard if you can't hold this kind of somewhat mystical idea that Christ's presence is really here in this element. I mean, if that's too far for you to go rationally, well, what else is too hard for you to go rationally? And you look at like mainline churches, or you look at even a lot of evangelical churches, and you're like, we're kind of like, this whole thing is pretty flat in terms of like there's not a lot of room.
Yes.
Now, and this is maybe why I will use the word Pentecostalism or charismaticism. Maybe that, like, in this yawning chasm of like just flat materialism,
Yes.
it's like, let me show you that the world is more than what you thought it was, and that Christ has real power.
Right.
It doesn't come in through sacramental language; it comes in other forms. But it was like, maybe we were just so thirsty for some sort of real presence, and so so you go back, to these people who were kind of debating over, is it like bread and wine, or is it is it Christ's real presence? Is it his symbolic presence or whatever? Like, if they knew that those arguments were going to lead to a place where people were like, yeah, I'm not sure Jesus was even a real person. Like, if they had any idea that could be like the slope that they were sliding down, do you think they'd be like, whoa, no, let's back this thing off?
Right. Well, you can pick on Zwingli. I'm just saying, like, you can pick on Zwingli in terms of like the slippery slope. But even there, I don't know, he might come to his own defense and say, well, I did affirm that there's real feeding that takes place. But someone like Calvin, he's unsatisfied with Luther's crass connection, or his language, his corporeal language, and he tries to imagine Christ's presence in spiritual terms. Like, Christ is spiritually present in the Eucharist. But when we celebrate the Eucharistic elements, we have to look up. The eyes of faith must look up to where Christ is, and behold him. That way, and so the Holy Spirit transports us to heaven, so to speak. So he sees Christ's presence in this spiritual, but at the same time, Christ is still present.
Yes,
it's not just a symbol for Calvin. The reason why he has issues with transubstantiation, for example, is that, and this is a fundamental point in Eucharistic theology, that you always have to maintain the connection between the sign and reality, which Augustine, formulated. With transubstantiation, when the substance of bread and the substance of wine are not present, you do away with that connection, because the substance is what makes bread. So when the substance of bread and wine is not there, then it's not bread, and so you obliterate the connection, the sacramental connection there between the sign and reality. And so this was another theological point that he a theological criticism that he had of transubstantiation. So Luther Calvin.
Wait. So just so I understand, so in other words, it becomes a problem if it becomes the body and blood. It becomes a problem because then the sign is no longer there.
Well, it becomes a problem when the substance of bread and wine is not present,
which would be the case in a very literal wooden understanding of transubstantiation. Is that correct?
Not literal, but in the
version or whatever language.
Because Christ, transubstantiation, the doctrine of transubstantiation argues that if you follow Aquinas and Peter Lombard on this particular point, they affirm Christ's substantial presence. It's a substantial presence. It's not really a material presence, right? They will use language, corporeal language for sure to explain Christ's presence in the Eucharist. But even when they use corporeal language, they don't mean material change or like literal, right? That Christ's material body is in. It's a substantial presence that's in the Eucharist. It's very much different. And so the problem for Calvin is not so. I mean, even though it is, the problem for the reformers, for Calvin and Thomas Cranmer and Peter Vermigli, is that the substance which of bread which makes bread is not there, right? So if it's not there, then the sign is not there,
Right.
so the sign cannot signify the reality, right? And so the accidents are not enough to sort of signify the Christ's body, right?
Yeah.
And so you obliterate that Augustinian link between the sign and the reality. And so philosophically speaking and theologically speaking, it becomes very problematic to affirm transubstantiation.
Sure.
And not just that, but you also have floating accidents too. This was another criticism. It's not enough to accept. It's too complicated, too complex.
Yeah.
And it's much simpler to affirm something like sacramental union, like Luther, or spiritual presence.
Yeah.
It's that Christ is made present in the Eucharist through the Holy Spirit.
Right.
And Christ's body exists right now. It exists at the right hand of the Father. It can't come down. Right? Because that's not how human bodies function. They can't be in multiple places at the same time. And so you have all these Catholic churches celebrating the Eucharist all over the world. Christ's body materially, he can't, that this is the Reformers' argument. But even there, I feel that they were criticizing a boogeyman.
Yeah.
Because that's not what the Catholics are thinking.
Right.
They're not saying that Christ's body is dragged down from heaven into the host everywhere on earth. They're not affirming that.
It also seems like just too rational a view of what the resurrected Christ's body is supposed to be like in some respects. Like guy who can walk through walls and look different apparently to different people or whatever. Like that just feels kind of limited. Right.
But then the funny thing about the Reformers, they criticize the Catholics for saying, I think that they're misrepresenting the Catholics here for saying that you can't drag Christ's body down to heaven. But then they're willing to affirm that Christ in his divinity is everywhere. Sure. But then you can't really separate Christ's divinity from his humanity. Right. Yeah. But in terms of like the influence of memorialism, to go back to your question, in evangelicalism, I think it dates back to Zwingli. Zwingli here is the main culprit.
Patient zero. How do we get from Zwingli to Cranmer? Or do we? Or do they really have much of a direct line? Because we know we want to get, because Cranmer is going to give us the line that we want to get to when it comes to Wesley. So what happens with Cranmer, and how to, like, this is where the rubber kind of meets the road in your own
work because you hit these three people, Vermigli and Bucer,
Bucer.
names I've heard a little bit about. But
Yeah.
Kramer, that's a guy that many of us,
are interested.
even if we don't know, we should know, right? Like,
Yeah.
Kramer was this, I watched The Tudors back in the day, not a show that I would recommend that anybody watches, but maybe, especially with no kids around. But yeah, it's like this, this whole Henry VIII and this wild thing that happens. And so Kramer is like a star in this whole show that leads us down towards Wesley and then even our kind of evangelical roots. So talk to us about how we get to that triumvirate of people that you're dealing with there.
Yeah. So with Cranmer, at the beginning, he held the Lutheran view of the Eucharist.
And Kramer, at this point, this is before
early Kramer.
Yeah, Kramer, who he then becomes, at the point in time, spoiler alert, the Archbishop of Canterbury. So he starts off very, very Lutheran in his view.
Of the Eucharist. And then, through his conversations with people who held the Zurich view of the Eucharist, which tended to emphasize, I would say, the symbolic. And through his conversations with Butzer, for example, and Vermigli, he moved away from the Lutheran view, away from affirming the crass connection there between the Eucharistic elements and Christ's body and blood. So his mature Eucharistic theology is that when the congregants feed on bread and drink the wine, bread is still bread, wine is still wine. Christ is spiritually present, right? But the manducation or the feeding on Christ, it's not located per se in the Eucharist, although it happens in the Eucharistic celebration. It's a reality that's really occurring alongside the physical eating of bread and the physical drinking of blood. Blood. Wine. Sorry.
Now we teach apologetics courses. We've got to be working against that. But yes.
Sorry, the physical drinking of wine. So, there happen concurrently.
Okay.
So he holds to the spiritual presence of the Eucharist, and I would say that influenced the English Church's position on this. Also, the BCP's understanding of the Book of Common Prayer. The Book of Common Prayer, and also Wesley. I mean, Wesley is very much he's taking in all these things, and so Wesley's view is pretty much the spiritual view,
right? So to clarify, this guy who starts off, he's a child of, he's a first generation child of the Reformation, Thomas Cranmer, right? Like he's living through the Reformation. The Reformations, as if you know, it's
Reformations.
It's a clean line. Like it's like crazy things happening.
Yeah, everywhere.
And the English one is a particularly interesting one because it actually it seems like it often it's. Sometimes you'll hear of the radical Reformation, and those are like, burn it all down. So I'm guessing a guy like Zwingli was kind of like, if it's Catholic, it's bad. But in England, it's not exactly like that. I mean, a lot of the liturgy, yes, there's a tremendous amount of animosity and tension between Protestants and Catholics.
Yes.
But not liturgically, not as much liturgically speaking. Like their churches look like, sound like, and act like, in many respects, Catholic churches.
Well, they took the middle position. It's like, okay, well, yes, we'll incorporate some Reformation or Protestant ideas or elements, and we'll also incorporate like the traditional elements,
Yeah.
like the liturgy, the high,
Yeah.
liturgical tradition.
And this is Anglicanism and Episcopalianism kind of to this day.
Yeah.
And so this Book of Common Prayer being their such that their prayer language, their liturgy, all these kinds of things wrapped, their main theology book, all these things kind of wrapped up into one.
Yeah.
Thomas Cranmer. And so he had to, so it's from this kind of express theology that, is it a century and a half later?
Yeah.
John Wesley, right? So like this point in time, like this has become a very kind of like well rooted
Right.
form of English
Yeah.
life and the Christian perspective.
Yeah.
Is this sort of memorial? Maybe we call it the memorial view of the not memorial. Sorry, that's too far. But the spiritual view of the Eucharist.
Yes,
Right?
and with Cranmer, he moves the English Church away from the sacrificial Mass,
Right.
and away from affirming transubstantiation, for example.
Sure. I actually don't know. Maybe like a brief, when you say sacrificial, that was one of there's at least two things in the book that your thesis that I was like, okay, what does the word manducation mean? I had to look up manducation. Didn't know that. It's chewing. Just so you know, eating. But then the other one, the sacrificial Mass. I mean, I've been to Catholic churches,
Yes.
experience, church services and stuff. But I guess I was like, I don't really know exactly what you mean by this kind of sacrificial Mass. So distinguish that from, because I've been to both Catholic and Anglican services and Orthodox services. So what is it specifically about the Mass that we mean as a quote sacrificial?
Yeah. So the Catholics believe that the Mass service, the Eucharistic, is a sacrifice, like. The liturgical service is sacred, and during the service, there comes a moment when Christ's death on the cross, or Christ's suffering on the cross, is represented in the Mass.
Okay.
And so
Christ dies in a sense.
So it's not. So this is where
I'm sure we can go way down the hole.
This is where this is where Protestants sometimes understand. They misunderstand the Catholics on this particular point. Also, you also see this in the 16th century with the Reformers. They're criticizing the Catholics for re-sacrificing Christ. And the Reformers say, well, Christ only died once. He can't die again.
Sure.
So why are you doing this? But for the Catholic teaching at that particular point did not say that there's a new sacrifice that's being offered in the Mass. It's not a new sacrifice. The Mass is only a representation of Christ's sacrifice on the cross. And so if it's a representation of Christ's sacrifice, it can't be a new sacrifice.
Sure.
And Christ is not being crucified.
Right. Yeah.
Right? He's not bleeding in the Mass. Right? But that's how the Reformers took it. And on this point, I would say it depends on who. It depends on who you're talking to. But for me, at this particular, I would say that the Reformers misunderstood Catholics on this point. And so, the sacrificial Mass it's this theological idea that simply argues or affirms that Christ's sacrifice is being represented in the Eucharist.
And this is what they move away from, because they go, this doesn't make sense, right?
The way, no, the Church only offers sacrifices of thanksgiving in the Eucharistic elements.
Yeah.
They don't re-sacrifice Christ or represent Christ, because the biblical texts don't really mandate that.
Sure.
Christ says, take and eat, not re-offer me as a sacrifice. And so, sure, on this particular point, the Reformers, they have a point. The text doesn't say that.
Yeah. It does say, this is my body.
It does say, this is my body. Right. And but yeah, so um, so with the sacrificial mass, really, yes, it's a representation of Christ's sacrifice. Um, and Cranmer really he helped the English Church to move away from the celebration of the Mass, to only affirm the sacrifice of thanksgiving and the Eucharistic celebration.
And there are two specific kind of like we mentioned at the outset that there's like some thoughts for the Wesleyan Church, and the two of them are about how we are embodied in some respects, kind of through this church process, or through this kind of through these kinds of services. And you mentioned Thanksgiving in there. I want to hit on that. Let's just get to Wesley for a second, because I think if we're children of Wesley, and of course,
Yeah.
we're not the only children of Wesley. Father Abraham had many sons, and so did Father Wesley. And so, but it's funny. I often tell friends, like, we are, you can be as Wesleyan as you want, but we are the Wesleyan Church. You need to know that. That's the name of it's like TWC, baby. That's who we are. We are the Wesleyan Church. And so, but obviously Nazarenes, Methodists of all kinds, and other kind of, Wesley has had a large history that a lot of people that have been influenced by him and his brother's teachings and other people. But what's funny is if he could see us now, would he be like, man, like, so I don't know how often your church celebrates communion or the Eucharist or whatever, but like our church is like, it's like, our discipline says, I think we have to do it. Is it 3 times a year or 4 times a year as the minimum? Anyway, it's not that often. It's kind of like, hey, this is what you have to do. And I can't imagine there's many churches that need to be twisted that much to do it. But I mean, once a month would be like,
Deepwater celebrates it
the place where you
week.
recently wrapped it. So they're a pretty atypical congregation, to be sure. But yes, absolutely. Deepwater was one of our, so in the Atlantic District of the Wesleyan Church here in Atlantic, Canada.
Yeah.
We love you guys in Dartmouth and Halifax. You're wonderful people. Pretty atypical, right? Most people are doing it maybe once a month, sometimes less, sometimes more. And it's optional. It just moves around. It's like, it's out of convenience more than anything else.
Yeah.
If Wesley could see that, how do you think he would respond to that?
He would tell us to celebrate communion frequently.
Sure.
He teaches constant communion, right? The duty of
He was hitting it multiple times a week. Is that right?
Taking, as often as he could.
Often as he
could. As he could. There are times he took maybe like 5 times in 1 week. That's just 1 week.
Yeah. That's crazy. It's funny. At my church, we have 2 services. And so sometimes people, when the second service rolls around, if they're on the team, they're like, should I do it again? I'm like, yeah, double dip, man. Like, there's no, as often as you what?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. So I think that's what he would say, for sure. Because for him, it is a sanctifying means of grace, right?
Yeah.
And it in some ways challenges us to recommit to Christ, to die to ourselves. We receive Christ, right? So in our own private devotions, when we read Scripture, we're spiritually fed by Christ, right? We receive Christ. When we hear the sermon, we receive Christ. I mean, the reformers affirm that the word and sacraments are the marks of the church. The reason is because through word we receive Christ, and through sacraments we receive Christ. With respect to the Eucharist, the reason why he would tell us to celebrate frequently, or as often as possible, it's because it's a sanctifying means of grace. Christ sanctifies us, and we're constantly challenged to live out holiness, the holy life, right? And so because of that, it is a spiritual aid for believers. It deepens our spiritual lives. So in that respect, I think we have to sort of like retrieve, and even if we don't celebrate it frequently, we certainly have to retrieve the idea that, hey, the the sacrament, for it to be a means of grace, one has to affirm that Christ is present.
Yeah.
You can't simply say it's just a symbol.
Yeah.
Yeah, that cheap cuts it completely. And Wesley would say, no, that's not my view of the Eucharist. It's not simply a symbol. And so you have to affirm Christ's presence in the Eucharist, and Christ's mediatorial presence becomes the basis for the church's nourishment, for it being a means of grace. So you can't have your cake and eat it too, say it's a symbol, but it's also a means of grace. It's like, how does that work theologically?
Well, I wonder how it works theologically. It's funny.
Simply doesn't work.
And I wonder about the symbol. So like I had a conversation last year, or maybe it was actually earlier on this year, I can't remember, but with a gentleman I know who he does work in First Nations contexts.
Yeah.
And so he also, they do, he works with NATES, which is it's indigenous spirituality, helping Christianity really indigenize into various places.
Yeah.
And there was a point where this is going to seem like it's out of line what we're talking about, but I just got to get when you talk about this idea of like, it's how flexible are these things? So like he did a ceremony with people. He didn't call it a communion ceremony, but it was very clearly that was what the point of it was an act of remembrance. And so, but they wanted to use things that were native to the area at the time. And so bannock was used for the bread. And I was like, okay, I get that. And then berries used for the cup, I guess. In some respects,
did he give an explanation?
I think he did.
Okay.
I think so.
Explanation.
Oh, again, that I like people. They didn't drink juice at that point. You know what I mean? So like, this would have been the closest in color, maybe in texture, in a representation of that. But I was like, but is that? So it's funny. It's funny to me.
Yes.
That like how far?
Right.
If it's just symbol.
Yes.
Then in some respects, okay. Well, how flexible is that?
Yeah.
Is that symbol, right? Like if he says every time you drink it, you don't drink berries. But is that the point, though? Is the point it had to be something to drink, or is the point you had to remember his bloodshed as the new covenant in his? Yeah. Right. And so it's funny that the world that is cracked open by this justness it poses more questions, frankly, than it does answers. Yeah.
Like, where are the limits here?
Yeah.
Can I use Coca Cola as and donuts?
Sure.
Can they function as sacramental signs?
Right.
To celebrate the No,
you're gonna go no on that. Okay, you heard it here first, folks. Dr.
Because the major point here is receiving the teaching that we have been taught by the Apostolic Church, right. Receiving that teaching, receiving the traditions. Yeah. For me, it becomes an issue of continuation.
Yeah.
So with Christ, he institutes it in the context of Passover.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly, the early Christians were Jewish, so they inherited that tradition. But also the early Christian church, per se, after the first century, inherited that practice because Christ taught us to do these things, to remember him when we partake in communion. And so it was very much an important ritual in the early church. And then over the years, that tradition, that Eucharistic tradition, was passed down to others. And for the modern church now, it's very much important for us to be committed to the teaching we've received from the Apostolic Church.
Mm-hmm.
And not just that, but Jesus, right? And so that's how we can.
But you know that the bread and the cup that we usually partake in
Yeah,
Not
I mean,
really the same bread and cup that would have been sitting around that table that night, right? I mean,
Right.
it's kind
it
of
was unleavened bread.
yes,
And so some churches don't even have unleavened bread,
right.
right?
Is that a
like,
problem? Is that too far?
Oh,
okay.
For me personally, yes, but will I refuse to partake? No.
Okay,
But
so you would aim to, hey, like let's get back to like as possible.
Okay. And
Okay. So
I don't know what to do with the juice.
This does leave us with a bit of we're not going to get into the conversation about juice is mine, wine is yours. Okay, I want to get to I want to ask you how you felt about when I led communion here last year and I used giant French bread. It's like, it's like this beautiful French bread. I won't ask you about that.
I love the reason why. It's because it symbolizes the unity of the church.
Right. It's French?
No. It's because you had one loaf of bread, loaf of bread, which symbolizes the unity.
Yeah,
and then you broke it, you shared it, right? Just symbolizing again, like believers feeding on Christ. There's only one Christ, and there's only one church that all believers are part of, and they're made one together. In Christ.
Yeah.
And so I really liked the symbolism of using one bread. And pretty much that's what the early church would have done.
Right.
And also in Catholic circles, and I would say Anglican circles.
I'll start there. It is a weird thing of like, I mean, I really want to get to these kind of implications that you have, but like my mind is swirling just so many directions. Like, it's interesting, like, so in our in the Wesleyan Church, in this denomination, I can't speak to like how Nazarenes or other people are doing it.
Yeah,
there is still this weird kind of I say it's weird because it ends up causing a lot of questions to come up, where like ordained or designated clergy are the ones who are to administer the sacrament.
Yes.
That still is in our books.
Yes.
And I've had people ask like, why? Like, why does that matter? And I think it's a really good question because we don't require ordained clergy to preach. You have to, in other words, like you can have a layperson come up and preach on a Sunday morning at your church. There's all these different kinds of things that because we don't actually present as a sacramental institution at all. All of a sudden you're like, okay, but why then do certain clergy have to do certain things? And I don't think this is expressly written in the discipline, but I would guess that in some respects, going back through to the Book of Common Prayer, and I would guess even I'm guessing this is latent in the Book of Common Prayer and actually would be expressed outside it, but it would be, and you can tell me where I'm wrong, it would be that because it's sacrament, it has to be somehow an ordained person who performs. So I think it's going back to like, well,
it goes back to the old church.
It's when it becomes the priest
who represents Christ, who administers the sacraments and also preaches
and prays the prayers that enable it to become not just bread, but what contains the real presence of Christ. Whether you mean, hey, look, now it's bleeding, or whether you mean it really now actually somehow can communicate to your person grace in a certain way. Like whatever it is in that spectrum, there's a point where that happens. And I think that's a leftover of that. I don't think it's expressed in there, but I think that's where it came from. So then it's like, okay, well then why can't anybody do that? We believe in the priesthood of all believers. And so I really do think it cracks in this odd ordination conversation where people are like, well, what is ordination? And all that kind of like, do we really care about it?
Yeah.
But I wanted to know about specifically then, what was it in these two things that you mentioned? That the Wesleyan Church could improve in or grow in. As I remember, I wrote them down as almsgiving, and then the other one I know how to say it, which is the idea that it's the congregation that's offering themselves,
the self-sacrifice of
the self-sacrifice offering congregation. Yeah. So talk to us about. Maybe just tell us what you mean by those things, and then show how they were, in some respects, in in the liturgy, in the teaching of the church, and how they might have disappeared.
So in the early church, or the ancient church, as the reformers say, you had different types of sacrifice mentioned in the Eucharistic elements. The first is Christ's sacrifice. Um, the second is I would say the sacrifice of the church.
Mhm.
The third was the sacrifice. The Eucharistic elements themselves were oblations, sacrifices or offerings. Um, and then the sacrifice of alms. And did I mention the church? Yes, the church as well. And so the reformers, they wanted to retrieve that tradition.
Okay.
And so that's why they affirmed those sacrifices. That the Eucharist, yes, it points to the sacrifice of Christ. It commemorates Christ's sacrifice, right? That's one. But also the Eucharistic elements themselves are, sacrifices in the sense that they commemorate Christ's sacrifice. You also have sacrifices of thanksgiving that are offered when after the congregants partake in communion. So the sacrifices of thanksgiving are like prayers, praises,
Okay.
offered as expressions of gratitude for the grace received in the Eucharist.
Okay.
And then alms. The reason why alms was very important in the early church is because almsgiving, I mean, the early church, mind you, the first Christians were Jewish, you know. Almsgiving was one of the pillars of Judaism. We have plenty of texts in scripture that, emphasize the importance of taking care of the widows, the poor, and whatnot, the marginal. And so almsgiving was very much important. That's why you have the beggar in Acts 3 outside the temple as Peter is entering in, right, begging. It was really important as people went to the temple. It was important for them to give, because it would be awkward. You're going to the temple to receive or to offer sacrifices to God, to reconcile yourself to God, and yet you can't show the same grace or love to your neighbor. Like, that's very much problematic, right? And so Judaism really addressed or touched on the vertical relationship and also the horizontal.
Sure.
That's why alms was very much important. And at the time of the Reformation, this is Butzer's point, is that the church wasn't giving much to the poor, or like almsgiving wasn't valued. And he's like, this needs to be retrieved. And I think, to Butzer's point, the reason why it's really important, because it's one practical way of challenging the church to practice acts of service or acts of sacrifice, right? So in offering something that belongs to you to someone else, you're sacrificing, you're giving a sacrifice, and you're being challenged to show your gratitude for the benefits that you've received from God in your own life.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's what I was very much concerned about. It's like, when I look at how we practice the Eucharist, or do the Eucharist, at what point do we help people to realize the importance of giving back to people, showing the gratitude in outward ways for the benefits that you've received from God in your own life?
That's good.
right? And so we need to find practical ways to help people realize that communion is not just about you receiving. Because if it's about just you receiving, then we've privatized it, and well, um, and it's all about just me, right? But how can you express the gratitude for the nourishment that you've received in the Eucharist, for the grace that you've received? How can you show that outwardly to it?
I think I get that more clearly now in some respects, because at first I was thinking that these kind of the four different kind of aspects you were talking about, that like in the bread and the cup, like in that moment or in those elements, that all of those things were somehow that those could be contained, that like that almsgiving was like a part of it. I'm going like, I don't know how you, so actually what you mean is they should be together.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for the early church, when they would celebrate communion, believers actually brought alms with them.
So they're going
Eucharistic celebration
so they're going forward to get the bread, and they drop some coins in the purse, or
yeah, they'll leave it on the table.
Okay.
Sometimes what the church would do, they'll give the leftovers, like bread and wine.
Oh yeah.
They'll give that to the poor.
Right. That makes. I could just see how
that's how the Eucharist, the elements become oblations.
I could see how easily, if it was the former, like it was like, here's my gold and silver. Now can I get the bread and body, or the bread and blood? I could just see how that could have that kind of like simony kind of a like.
Oh,
now I can acquire the grace.
I see your point. I see. It was voluntary, but it was in their DNA.
Right.
That's my point. Is like, how can we retrieve that and make it part of who we are? Because the body of Christ is a body shaped by God's goodness. But not only is it shaped by God's goodness, but it's also shaped by gratitude for the goodness that we have received. So by giving, we were shaped, our characters are shaped. We become other directed. We think about others. We think about showing love to our neighbor. And it helps us see the what is it? Not the end goal. The end goal is not a good word here. Oh, it helps us see the practical outcomes of Christianity, right? It's not simply about you and yes, it's an important.
It's like for the sake of the
relationship.
world.
Your relationship with God is important.
Yes,
but you have to be a light to the world.
Yeah.
Yeah,
for the life of the world, for the life of the world.
Yes, and you're called to love your neighbor.
Yeah.
And so, what are tangible ways in which you can show neighborly love?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the beautiful thing about the Eucharist is that it challenged early believers to, to give.
Yeah. In all kinds of ways,
and to be grateful, to show their gratitude.
Yeah, Eucharist literally means Thanksgiving, right? Like now, that's why it's a great word. It's just, unfortunately, it's also a Greek word, and so it does have this kind of like it's both wonderfully communicative and also kind of like liturgical and distancing at the same time. Maybe we should start calling them Thanksgiving meals.
Yeah, and another piece, the sacrifice of the church. This is another important part. How can we create liturgical space in our Eucharistic elements to help the church to maybe to proclaim their commitments, their sacrificial commitments to God together,
right?
Not privately, but together.
Yeah.
And how can we emphasize that togetherness?
Yeah.
Of all of us offering ourselves up as a living sacrifice to God. And
I wanted to ask you about that. So in a
Yeah.
few weeks, I'm going to be sitting at, starting next week, actually, whenever we're recording this on the May 1st. So starting next week, we're entering into a 4-week series of online teachings for Wesleyan worship leaders. In about 3 weeks, I'm going to be doing one on sacramentality. So that's just a kind of hour-long, partially guided conversation. And this is going to be obviously bing, 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 bringing in my mind. So if you had worship leaders in a room. Now, obviously, we know that worship leaders, I mean, it's one term that's used for anything. Somebody who gets up and leads songs once a quarter of their church, to people who are actually directly involved for actually programming the services. So you have a wide swathe of kind of like authority and scope.
Yes.
But if you could speak to people who actually program and lead services in the Wesleyan tradition, what words of advice would you give them? If you're like, well, I don't feel comfortable giving words of advice, what thoughts to like be okay? Now, how could, like, I hear what you're saying, Dr. Kazadi. I would love for this to be more connected to real world application. So I'd love for us to see that this actually missionalizes people by helping them see that the grace that they've received is also the measure that they should use. So that's kind of the alms portion of this. But I also love them to see that this is not just a them, it's an us. So it's a corporate, I'm just thinking of the words of Christ, this is my body, and how polyvalent that is, right? So if this is my body, he's talking about the bread, but this is my body, he's talking to the church, right? And so, but if you could give them some words to be like, okay, that's great, but how does that actually help me on Sunday? Or when I look at the next quarter and determine how to plan my services? How can
especially the Eucharistic service?
Yeah, well, whether or not I mean, part of the challenge is if you call it a Eucharistic service,
it has to be weekly.
You're going to have people are going to be like, oh, well, you mean that once a quarter when I do it? Because one thing I've noticed as a worship leader is there's a tension point, which is the more attention you have to give to it, the less likely you are to do it regularly, because it becomes then literally the center of, like, you know what I mean? Like, now you're getting 5 minutes teaching beforehand, 10 minutes during the service, and you're just like, wow, I just don't know if I can do that all the time. And so a church like Deepwater, the reason they can do it all the time is because they don't really talk that much about it, right? It's just I'm sure they did some teaching on it, and now it's just a part of their service.
It's part of their service, yeah. And there is an invitation, like the normal,
for sure, yeah. But it's not. It doesn't feel cumbersome to them at this point in time.
No,
to work it into their overall goals of their service, right? And this is where if you transport yourself into the 18th centry, John Wesley wouldn't see it as cumbersome because it just was, in some respects, it was the point. Either the point or like a complete pivot point in service. That's just not where we're at now. And so I don't know that you're arguing for it to be the crux of the service. That'd be a whole other kind of conversation. But at the very least,
I'd like it to be the crux. So, but yeah, I'm the traditionalist Wesleyan. Like, I'm the traditionalist Wesleyan.
That's right. So if it's going to be in our services, how can it be, and how can it then be kind of like nudged in that direction towards, care for the world and corporate view?
Yeah. I think for starters, maybe a helpful sort of like starting point, I would say, would be the way you structure services. I really like when I read the liturgies of the past. I really like how they begin with prayer of confession. Because the reason why that's important, because it shows the humility of the church. But it also recognizes that one can simply come into God's presence without repentance, without confessing, right? Because if we don't confess, then what are we theologically saying about the gathering of believers in the presence of God? And so you begin there. You also have absolution, or like proclamation of forgiveness. Not that the minister is the one absolving the congregants, but really emphasizing the point that Christ has forgiven you. Why not? When you get to the Eucharist, the the Eucharist piece. Again, I'll stress that it's still important to exhort believers, or like to instruct believers to examine themselves before partaking. And some congregational prayers or responses would be really helpful in sort of like challenging um, the congregants to sort of like see that, okay, like now we've received the Eucharist. The next piece is offering ourselves up as a sacrifice to God, as an expression of thanksgiving that we for the grace we've received, right? We have to show gratitude in some ways, and so if we can capture that in congregational prayers or congregational responses after that, I think that that'll be a beautiful way of highlighting, touching, or addressing that point. In terms of like almsgiving, um, maybe this is something that can be done in Sunday school, or like or even afterwards, challenging congregants to help their neighbor in some small way, and see that as an expression of gratitude for how Christ has showed up in their life, or how Christ has benefited them, right? Because the Christian faith is not just about us, right? So we have to challenge, whether through a word of instruction, or actually building it in the DNA, and tell congregates, okay, when we're going to celebrate communion, bring something with you that we can share with the poor people in our community. As an act of faith, as an act of gratitude for the grace you're going to receive in the Eucharist. So that I see these as small, simple, sort of like ways of incorporating these in a Eucharistic service.
It's good. Yeah, that's even those last few suggestions, I think were, really encouraging for me. So if you're a worship leader out there, like I want to challenge and encourage you. Maybe you're in a place where you're doing this all the time. That's awesome. But yeah, just thinking about how, like I often use the word communion is still the term that we use.
Yes.
And I think it is and I mentioned the word bivalent earlier. I think it's helpful because it's intended to foster a communion between humanity and divinity.
Yeah.
But it does that in a way by fostering connection between humanity. So it is that it is that same that same loaf. It is that kind of corporate.
Yes.
It's the communion.
Yes.
Kind of part of that. And so likewise then with so just kind of like angling yourself in that direction, and then angling yourself in the direction of saying, okay, freely we've received, freely we will now give, right? So kind of like, how does that mean, hey, the fourth Sunday of the month is when we have communion. It's also the fourth Sunday of the month that we have food drive or whatever. And so like that's we bring those things together.
Yes.
And like really kind of intentionally connecting those things together would be helpful.
Yes.
Dr. Kazadi, we in a moment have to go and actually the reason we're recording this live in person, if anybody's watching on YouTube, it's funny because it's like our eyes are like over the screen the whole time. It's going to be like, you guys normally, hi, yes, we're here. I can hear, look, come on, look, he's right here. It's all happening. Normally when we do this, I just do most of my stuff remote, but we're here for the graduation.
It's always good to do it in person.
So we gotta bail off. But the last thing I had to say before we go is, other than thank you, is on page 19, you have this. It's probably, I don't know if it's a throwaway line, or maybe if I page 19 of your thesis.
Yes.
I don't know if I misinterpreted it or not, but this is for me. This is something important for me. So you're talking about Scotus's theology, and this is the quote. You say, it seems to indicate that there was a serious tension between conversion and annihilation in Scotus's theology. So he's talking about this like he's trying to be like he's trying to work out this kind of whatever.
He's trying to work,
and but the line that you said is this tension, which he probably did not wish to resolve. That's what you said.
Yeah.
And I just want to say, if you like, because I mean, this has been a wide ranging conversation on the Eucharist and all this kind of stuff that you've used, now you know how to say manjucation, all these wonderful things. Some of it was probably, woof, when you stuck through this at the end, that's totally great. Some of it was over my head as well. But I want to say that the thing that does end up, I think, rocking a lot of people off the boat is this idea of like, well, I can't explain it. And so theologians, people like Dr. Kazadi, they're doing the work. They're trying to dig in, but not everybody has to.
Yes.
And it's okay if you can be like, I can't explain it. I'm like, often people say you don't want to recourse to mystery too quickly, which I respect, but I also want to say it's totally okay to hang out with mystery. And so some things I've found in my life is when you try to explain them, they kind of evaporate from view.
Yeah.
And I think that trying to explain this idea that Christ says, this is my body. Sometimes it's like, I don't know if I need to explain this. If I try to explain this, it kind of like, it's like, where did it go? And then all of a sudden it can lose its meaning and impact in some respects. And so a lot of that conversation earlier, that's great. It's good to understand the difference maybe between annihilation and conversion. That's good. Mostly it's like, take, eat, this is my body. And just the idea like, wow, like he's with us in this moment.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes.
Wow.
Yes. And we don't have to rationally understand how.
Yeah.
Right. And it's unfortunate that the mode of Christ was adopted as dogma.
Yeah.
Transubstantiation.
Yes.
It's one mode of Christ's presence.
Yeah.
One mode that tries to explain how Christ is present in the Eucharist. And if the church only affirmed real presence, I don't think we would have the conflicts or these Eucharistic controversies. Well, probably we will with people who say that it's only a sign, right? But Luther, Calvin, I don't think they'll have a problem with the Catholics. I don't even have a problem with transubstantiation because it's not teaching a material presence of Christ in the Eucharist. It's only affirming real presence and says that the Eucharistic elements, the substance converts into the substance of Christ's body and blood. And at the end of the day, for Thomas Aquinas, it's a mystery.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. It's mysterious how Christ is present. We can only affirm it by faith.
Yeah, that's good.
That's what Luther says, and that's what Aquinas says too.
So remember, just is a 4-letter word, but faith is a 5-letter word. So we'll leave it with that. Dr. Kazadi, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
That was good.
Thank you. Yeah.